What if the love they promised you was actually the perfect trap to erase yourself? In the beginning, everything seemed beautiful. He was present, charming, caring. So caring, you thought you'd found what you'd always been looking for. He knew exactly what to say, how to touch, when to show up. He read your soul like someone leafing through a familiar book. But you didn't know back then that he only read to find where to push, where to control, where to dominate. Not out of affection, but out of strategy. What seemed like attention was disguised surveillance. What seemed like zeal was the unhealthy need for possession. Every "let me know when you get back" message was a seed of control, and you, wanting to be loved, cultivated it. Every "who were you with" was a test. Every sigh he gave at something you didn't like was a silent correction, and little by little you began to prune yourself. You changed your tone of voice, your way of speaking, the clothes you wore. You began avoiding friends, thinking twice before accepting invitations. But the cruelest part, you did it thinking you were doing it out of love, thinking that giving in was proof of maturity, that decreasing conflict was being emotionally intelligent. Until, without realizing it, you no longer knew who you were. You no longer spoke with the same freedom. You no longer smiled with the same lightness. Because loving became a game of survival, an emotional minefield. Any misstep, and he would withdraw, disappear, go silent, and his silence hurt more than any scream. You found yourself trying to predict what he would feel, adapting even before being criticized. He didn't need to forbid it, it was enough to react coldly. And you, lacking the courage to confront him, accepted it. Because everything was camouflaged in sweet phrases. It's because I love you. It's just concern. I only want the best for you. And you believed. Because you wanted to believe. Because it was easier to justify than to admit that the love they gave you was, in fact, a prison. But the moment came when your body began to give signs. Your chest tightened, your throat burned. You felt something was wrong, but you couldn't put a name to it. Because the pain was subtle, the blow was emotional. And the most dangerous thing was that on the outside, everything still seemed perfect. He was still the same charming man he'd always been, in front of others. And you kept quiet, because saying you were suffering seemed absurd. After all, he never hit you, never yelled, never cheated. But he did something even crueler. He made you doubt yourself. This is the first red flag. When love demands that you change who you are to be accepted, it's not love, it's manipulation. When you need to hide what you feel to maintain peace, it's not care, it's control. And when you no longer know where affection ends and fear begins, it's because it's past time to wake up. If something inside you began to unsettle while listening to this, it's because this story may be more yours than you'd like to admit, but calm down. This is just the beginning. The hardest part is yet to come, but it's also the most liberating. Because now, you're no longer silent. Now you're looking at the truth. And that's where your story begins again. Abuse doesn't always come in the form of a scream. Sometimes it comes disguised as concern. You thought he was just jealous, that his attentive way of knowing everything about your life was just an intense way of loving. After all, who wouldn't want someone who cares about every detail? But what seemed like affection was actually the beginning of a much more complex emotional engineering. Control disguised as affection. He wanted to know where you were, with whom, why, and for how long. But it all came with seemingly harmless phrases. I only feel calm when I know where you are. I worry too much, that's all. It's just that I love you so much that I get anxious. And for a while, you believed it. You believed this was the price of feeling loved, and because you wanted that love, you gave in. You began adjusting your schedule to avoid conflict. You cancelled appointments. You avoided people. You distanced yourself from those who were mirrors of your freedom. All this in the name of what seemed like care, but it was just the net closing in. He didn't need to give orders. He'd just take a step back, and you'd get the message. A silence from him, a frown, a disappearance of a few hours, and you'd already begin to correct yourself. You learned that when he pleased you, he was sweet. When you questioned him, he disappeared emotionally. And so, like a subtle training, you were conditioned to exist within his rules. The most perverse thing is that this cycle didn't feel like violence. He was kind, attentive, polite. In front of others, he'd praise you. He'd tell you he was grateful for everything you did. He'd post photos. He'd send flowers. He seemed like the man of your dreams, and that was precisely why you couldn't see what was happening. Because how can you accuse a man of abuse who praises you in public, who calls you my life, who seems so present and protective? But therein lies the mistake. Narcissists aren't blatant monsters. They're charming. And it's this charm that destroys your credibility. You began to feel confused. You didn't know if you were overreacting, if you were too sensitive, if you were wrong to think something was off. After all, what he did wasn't directly offensive. It was more like a game, a pendulum. One day he was loving, and the next he was indifferent, and you began to live for the good days, for crumbs of affection that came only when you obeyed, when you withdrew, when you did everything right. This is the psychological game of the narcissistic abuser. Give and take, draw closer and pull away, sweeten and punish. And in the middle of it all, you, trying to understand where you lost control of your own life. And the answer is cruel. You didn't lose control. He was taken from you. And you gave him up willingly because he made it seem safe to do so. But it wasn't. And now you find yourself in a profound dilemma. You still love. You still feel. You still wish everything could go back to the way it was in the beginning. But at the same time, something inside you already knows. You already understand. You already see the pattern. You already recognize that that love isn't love. It's a system of emotional domination that trains you to live with less than you deserve. You still don't know how to get out. You still feel guilty. You still think you can fix it. But the truth is, you can't fix a story built on self-denial. What you need isn't more effort. It's vision. It's courage to face what's happening. It's strength to admit that what seems like caring is actually a silent code of emotional obedience. And if that hurt to hear, it's because it might be true. But it's also a sign that healing has already begun. Because only those who have already seen that something is wrong begin to heal. And now, for the first time, maybe you're ready to start saying, this isn't love, this is prison, and I wasn't made to live chained within what should make me flourish. You didn't realize it when it started. It was slow. First, you stopped talking about things that bothered you. Then, you started avoiding topics that sparked arguments. Later, you stopped mentioning people, places, memories. And finally, you became completely silent, not because he told you to, but because you learned that when you spoke up, something bad followed. Silence, indifference, disappearance, emotional punishment. So, to keep the peace, you kept quiet. And every time you kept quiet, a piece of you died. He didn't need to raise his voice. He just had to walk away. And you, afraid of losing that affection that seemed so rare, did everything to bring him back. He was the emotional reward you chased. Like a prize, like a dose of relief. And the more you gave in, the more he understood he could continue the game. You became an expert at anticipating crises, at avoiding reactions, at adapting. And so, the relationship stopped being an exchange. It became a war you fought alone. You fought to maintain the atmosphere, to avoid falling apart, to rescue the man from the beginning. But he no longer existed, and perhaps he never truly existed. What existed was a man who discovered exactly where your vulnerabilities lay and learned to use them as tools. He knew your emotional need. He knew your hope. He knew your desire to build something real, and he used all of this against you. subtly but effectively, with phrases like, "You're too sensitive," "You're always playing the victim," "You interpret everything wrong," "You can't talk like a mature woman." And you began to wonder, is he right? You began to doubt your own pain. You began to try to change, to be calmer, more understanding, more of a woman. And he loved it. He loved seeing you try to fix yourself, because every time you did this, he reaffirmed his power. But the truth is, the problem was never that you were too much. The problem is that he never knew how to deal with a woman who feels. And so you stopped trusting yourself. You stopped trusting your memory. You stopped trusting your instincts. And when a woman loses confidence in herself, she's completely vulnerable. Because now anything he says becomes the truth. He can manipulate, he can distort, he can even deny events, and you believe it, because you no longer know what you saw, what you heard, what you experienced. This is the core of emotional gaslighting, making you question yourself so much until you no longer know what's real. And when you no longer know what's real, you depend on him. You depend on his version. You depend on his mood. You depend on his interpretation of you. And so you stop being the protagonist of your life. You become a supporting player in his game. You become hostage to the narrative he created, until one day you look in the mirror and don't recognize yourself. Not for what you see, but for what you've lost. You've lost yourself. And it's at that point that something inside you screams. A muffled voice, almost powerless, but still alive. It wasn't meant to be this way. And that phrase, however weak, is a rupture, because when you start to doubt the relationship, it's a sign that you're starting to believe in yourself again. It's the beginning of deconstruction. It's the crack through which the light begins to shine. You're not exaggerating. You're not crazy. You're awakening, and awakening hurts. But it also liberates. The pain you feel now isn't the end of a love, it's the shattering of an illusion. You spent so long believing he was the love of your life that now, when you see him walk away or choose to walk away, everything seems to crumble. The ground disappears, the air is short, your heart tightens, and you wonder, how will I live without him? But what you still don't understand is that what hurts isn't him. What hurts is the deconstruction of the fantasy, the breaking of the cycle, the withdrawal from the conditioning. Because a relationship with a narcissist works like an addiction. He offers doses of emotional pleasure, validation, intense attention, and then abruptly withdraws it all. You get used to living for these doses. When he treats you well, it's as if everything makes sense again. When he ignores you, the whole world falls apart, and you live waiting for the moment when he'll be that man from the beginning again. But he doesn't come back, because that man never really existed. He was a performance, a carefully constructed character to capture you, and the cruelest thing is that he appears whenever he feels you pulling away. Because the narcissist can't stand losing control. So he comes back with flowers, with messages, with vows, with regrets. And you, fragile, want to believe, because you still love, because you still hope, because you're still trapped. And it's in this cycle that you begin to disappear. You no longer know what's right or wrong. You no longer know if you're exaggerating or being fair. You no longer know if you're crazy or if you're just tired. And the answer is you're exhausted of trying to fix what can't be fixed, of trying to understand someone who never explained themselves, of carrying the weight of an entire relationship alone. Because the truth is, you stayed. You stayed even when you were in pain. You stayed even when his gaze turned to contempt. You stayed even when you cried, and he turned away. You kept trying to be enough, but you were already gone. You always were. The one who was never fully there was him. And that's the most devastating part, realizing that everything you gave, he never appreciated. Because he wasn't there out of love. He was there out of a need for control. He was there out of vanity. He was there out of ego. And now you have to do the hardest part. Accept that you've been emotionally alone for a long time. That the relationship ended long before you said goodbye. That you struggled alone against absence, disguised as presence. And in this morning, you cry. Not for him, but for yourself. For the lost time. For the energy you gave, for the woman you were and who was too silent. But it's in this crying that something begins to be born, a small certainty, a whisper, an internal phrase, "I don't want this anymore." And that phrase, however silent it may seem, is a scream. It's a revolution. It's resistance. It's your soul returning to its own body. Because you're not losing the love of your life, you're freeing yourself from your conditioning. And soon you'll realize that this pain was actually the first contraction of a new birth, yours. Your healing will never depend on his change, but on your decision to never again accept what he offers. For a long time, you waited for him to change, waited for him to mature, waited for him to acknowledge his mistakes. Because he doesn't feel guilty, because he feeds on your effort, your doubt, your hope, and this needs to stop. You don't need to wait anymore. You don't need to justify it anymore. You don't need to give it another chance. You need closure, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of self-love, because as long as you're stuck in the illusion of change, you're stuck with him. You're stuck in the cycle. You're stuck in the pain, and you deserve more. You deserve lightness. Waited for him to finally take responsibility for the pain he caused you. You believed his promises, his tears, his apologies. Each relapse was fueled by the hope that perhaps now he would understand. But no, he didn't understand. And deep down, you always knew. The narcissist doesn't change. He merely adapts his language to maintain control. He senses when you're about to leave, and reappears as if he were a different person. But he's not. He's the same man, with new words. You deserve peace. You deserve a love that doesn't need to be proven every day with sacrifice. The truth is, he's not going to leave your life. You're the one who needs to close it to him, lock the door, silence the notifications, erase all traces, not to forget him, but to remember you. Because every time you make room for him to return, you diminish yourself a little more. You tell yourself you're still not worth enough to be loved without pain. And that's not true. You are. The same manipulation with a different scent. And you, tired, still want to believe, because part of you still loves, still hopes, still wishes everything could go back to the way it was in the beginning. But the beginning was the disguise. The beginning was the theater. The beginning was the bait. And there's no going back to a fantasy, because fantasies don't sustain reality. And the reality is that he won't change, because he doesn't see a problem with being who he is. You always have been. He's the one who's never been able to see it. And now it's your turn to see that you're wasting time with someone who makes you beg for affection, to see that your story is being written with crumbs when you were born for banquets, to see that it's not him holding you back, it's the fear of letting go. But freedom will never come without an act of courage, and you're ready for him. You don't need him to change. You need him to go. And more than that, you need to choose never to go back. The woman who once remained silent today has a voice, and the world will hear. You spent sleepless nights trying to understand where you lost yourself, trying to fix what wasn't yours to resolve, trying to recover someone who only existed in your memories, and who, in truth, was never truly there. You tried everything. You believed in love. You believed in promises. You believed that if you loved him enough, he would change. That if you were patient, he would become the man you deserved. But today you understand. He was never that man. He was a character, a carefully staged script to keep you captive. And you with all your purity, with all your truth, with all your love, fell. But falling wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because at the bottom of the pit where he left you, you found something he could never control. Your essence. You're still standing, even hurt, even tired, even scarred. And standing up after everything he did is already an act of resistance. You are no longer a hostage to a cycle. You are the author of a new story. You are no longer what remained after the relationship. You are what was reborn despite it. And no one has the right to silence you anymore. No one will tell you how you should feel anymore. No one will control what you wear, what you say, what you desire, because the woman you are becoming is free. And freedom scares those who profit from your silence. But you will not be silent, not anymore. You will tell your story. You will embrace other women. You will reach out to those who are still trapped. You will inspire those who still believe they deserve little. You will transform pain into words, silence into voice, scar into flag. You are not weak. You never were. You were just tired of fighting for someone who never fought for you. And now, finally, you've chosen the one you should have chosen all along. You. And if he shows up again, with new words, new speeches, new attempts, you won't be shaken. Because now you recognize yourself, you honor yourself, you belong to yourself. And when a woman belongs to herself again, no one can hold her back. If this video touched a chord, no one else has. It's because your story isn't over yet. You're just at the beginning of your new self. A self where you no longer beg for affection, no longer live in fear, no longer walk on broken pieces. A self that blossoms without asking permission. If this resonated with you, comment below. What fell for you today? Share this video with someone who needs a wake-up call. It could be the truth that saves someone who still believes they're experiencing love, when in fact they're experiencing control. Subscribe to the channel because I'll be here to remind you in each new video that real love doesn't silence, it doesn't punish, it doesn't erase. Real love lets you be whole. Real love sees you. Real love doesn't make you afraid to be yourself. And activate the bell because your journey back to yourself is just beginning.